Hello everybody and welcome back to another album review / reaction here on my channel. I'm so excited because today we're going to listen to the brand new album Delta Kream by the Black Keys. If you've never seen any of my reviews before on my channel, know that what I'm going to basically be doing is just listening to the album for the very first time and giving you my thoughts in real time. So I'm going to be basically hit play and listen through the entire album from front to back, talking over the entire thing. I will not be including the actual audio from the album in this video, so if you don't have a copy to listen along with, I will include a link in the description of this video to listen to the album along with me on Spotify. Another thing I have to mention is, maybe you will have already noticed this, but I also try to include a lot of timestamps for things throughout this video, so if you want to skip my big rigmarole at the beginning of the video, usually I'll talk about the Black Keys or whatever band I'm listening to their album for a little while beforehand, give you sort of my history with the band and you know, my feelings and thoughts about them and their music production and whatnot. Beforehand, you can skip all that and go right to track 1. It should be right there on the timeline because I'm sure I've added the timestamp for that. If you have a favorite track on the album and you'd like to hear me talk about that specific track, just go and click on the timeline and look for that specific track. If you want to skip all that stuff and go right to the end of the album and see what I think sort of as an overview, sort of my general review of the album, you can go ahead and do that as well. Another thing I want to mention before we get going here is that normally when I do a video like this, I try to have the CD. That's my preferred method of listening to music. I really enjoy CDs, and if you're not aware of this, having a CD is still the highest quality audio that you can purchase and own for yourself, unless the album or a band has released an album in 24-bit, some crazy kilohertz rate. WAV files, which are lossless audio files, which is what the audio comes at on a CD, is still the highest possible quality audio that you can hear. However, none of that really matters, I guess, in context to this video. I just want to promote, go buy CDs whenever you can, because it is really high quality audio, the highest that you can get, unless you can buy FLAC or lossless files on Bandcamp or a website online. Anyway, I digress. The reason I bring that up is because today I don't actually have this album. I live on a farm out in the country in the middle of the United States, and I went to the sort of city that's nearest to us, has one Walmart. That's the only place that they would carry any sort of music stuff at all. And they did not have a copy. I went there just this morning, and they did not have a copy of the Black Keys' new album. I asked the guy, they went to the back and looked and everything, and they helped me look. They didn't have any copies. So, unfortunately, I do not have the CD, which means I'm going to be doing something for the first time. I'm going to be using my tablet here to listen to the album, which means I will be listening on Spotify as well. However, I'm a total cheapskate, and I only have the free version of Spotify, so I will probably be getting some ads. However, I will do my best to cut all those things out of the video and keep it so that everything just flows as nicely as possible from one track to the next, so you shouldn't have to worry about that. But it is going to be something that will be a little bit different for me doing this video. I like to use the CD, so that's kind of a bummer. However, what was not a bummer, and something that I do think all Black Keys fans will appreciate, is that we stopped at some garage sales on the way to Walmart to check if the new Black Keys album was there. And while I didn't get the Black Keys album at Walmart, I did get some really cool stuff that I think Black Keys fans will enjoy. So I was just going to show you that real quick. One of the things I got was this big stack of 45 records, 45s. It's a nice stack. I paid $5 for this stack, and I haven't really even looked through it yet, but I did want to point out just a few things. There's a few colored 45s in here. This is a blue one, and this is for the Old Schmaltz Waltz by the Six Fat Dutchmen. I'm sure that'd be really interesting. The other side is Waltzing in the Woods. And there's actually another RCA Victor Records 45. And I would assume that this is 33 1/3, but it looks pretty old. I'm not sure. This may actually be a 78. The speed that you're required to listen to. This is the Barbara polka, and on the other side we have the Helen polka by Henry Rene and his Musilek Orchestra. So I believe that would be some sort of a German orchestra. But there's also a red 45, and I know none of this has anything to do with the Black Keys, but I just thought it was kind of cool. Big stack of 45s here. And the reason I bought that stack was because I was looking through it, and the first one I saw on top was a Cliff Richard 45, which I really enjoy Cliff Richard's music. And then there were a few Dwayne Eddy records in there as well, and some other things, and I was like, hey, if I'm like, you know, only through 10 of these like 45s, and it's a cool stack, and there's a few things in there that I already like, I'll just offer him $5 for the whole stack. And she said yes. Along with the 45s, I also got 2 sweet books This book is The Calling of Dan Matthews by Harold Bell Wright. This is a cool old Western book from 1909. So that's neat, but even cooler than that is this. I'm not sure if this is a first edition printing or not, but this is The Virginian by Owen Winster from 1903. Copy from 1903 of the actual Virginian, which is actually really cool. That's a pretty famous Western story. Along with all that stuff, and I think probably the coolest stuff, I managed to get some actual records that I know everyone here will appreciate. So you have a Nat King Cole record. This is unforgettable. It's just sort of like a greatest hits sort of song collection. I enjoy that. We've got Surfin' Safari by the Beach Boys. I should have had this already, but I didn't have that one yet. Then we've got some Duane Eddy records, which if you're not familiar with Duane Eddy and you enjoy the Black Keys, I highly recommend looking them up. Duane Eddy is my favorite guitar player of all time. He is considered the godfather of twang music. I absolutely love his guitar playing and his songwriting and everything that he did in the music industry. He is now in his 90s, I believe, but he did actually play guitar on Dan Auerbach's solo album. I think the album was called Waiting for a Song. I have a copy of it over here, but he actually played guitar on 2 tracks on that album. So Duane Eddy is in Dan Auerbach's circle of sort of musician friends, and that's just amazing because he is absolutely a legend in the industry. I don't recall getting this one, but that's okay. The Tale of Patches, sung by Dickie Lee. Not even sure what that one is. Don't recall getting that. Here we have a record that I did already have, but I wanted to. You can never have too many copies of a good old record. This is Have Twangy Guitar Will Travel by Duane Eddy again. I highly recommend looking up Duane Eddy if you're not familiar with him. And then we have The Twang's The Thang, another Duane Eddy album from when he was younger. And then, to me, the prize catch of all of this, one of my absolute favorite artists, and if you like the Black Keys, I highly recommend you check them out. This is a Nancy Sinatra record, which, by the way, if you ever see a Nancy Sinatra record, just buy it because they are hard to come by. I'm not saying they're worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars. They are musically because the music is all fantastic, but this is one of her albums with Lee Hazelwood. She did several, I believe, duet albums with him, and this is a really, really, really cool album. I'm so glad I found this. I would have paid $10 for this album alone, let alone $10 for basically everything I just showed you. So anyway, there's my cool purchases that I got on my way to go see if my local Walmart had a copy of the Black Keys album, but they didn't. So at least maybe you can enjoy some of that stuff and look some of that stuff up. Again, Duane Eddy. Look that up. And of course, everyone's probably familiar with Frank Sinatra, Nancy Sinatra's dad. A lot of people they sort of sleep on Nancy Sinatra and don't necessarily take her too seriously as a musical artist, but that is wrong. Nancy Sinatra, all of her albums are amazing. Go look her up. I promise you will not be disappointed. Okay, so now to the Black Keys. I mentioned that I'm a huge fan of the Black Keys, and most of the bands that I do album reviews of here on my channel, I have seen them live, have a t-shirt, things like that. I have their entire discography on CD. That's not the case with the Black Keys. I've never had the opportunity to see them live. I don't have any merch or anything from them at all, which is why I decided to just wear sort of a plain, nicer shirt today with an actual collar rather than my 100,000 black like metal band t-shirts that I own. But anyway, these are all the Black Keys albums that I do have and sort of some Black Keys adjacent projects, just so you're sort of aware of my sort of history with the Black Keys. So this is their earliest album of theirs that I have. I believe it's their 3rd album. This is Magic Potion. And this was back when they were still primarily very raw sounding. I don't think that there's a lot of bass on this album. Mostly just Dan Auerbach playing guitar, Pat Carney playing drums. And then from there, we went to their sort of, the first album that they did produced by, this is Attack and Release, the Black Keys' first album produced by Danger Mouse. And this album was their first album to sort of have more sort of additional things thrown on top of the songs, not just sort of the garage blues rock sound that they were known for on their first 3 albums. But this is an interesting album, and it's not my favorite of theirs, but it's still their first one. It's very important in terms of their whole catalog, because this was the first album that they decided to have much more production added to it, which is something that is very important to me as a music listener. I love all of the things that are added to songs that aren't necessarily just bass guitar, drums, vocals. It's all those things that are added to the song that sort of make everything, the little sprinkles that you throw on top of the song, as I always say, to make it every song special and unique. Then we have the Black Rock album. If you're not familiar with this is the Black Keys did a whole sort of hip hop album. Really, 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 really awesome album. If you can manage to find a copy of it, it's great. Then we have Dan Auerbach's, I believe this is his first solo album, Keep It Real. Or Keep It Hid. Sorry, Keep It Hid. Good album. Then we have the album that introduced me to the Black Keys, the first one I managed to get. The rest of the stuff I went back in time to get. But this is the absolute classic. Maybe my favorite Black Keys album, but I'm not sure. This is Brothers. Everyone watching this video that knows the Black Keys knows their songs off of this album. It is absolutely fantastic. One of my favorite albums of all time. Basically, I have everything of theirs from since then. We have El Camino here. Then we have Turnin' Blue here. The Don't Look At It Too Close or You'll Get Sick. We have another side project of Dan's, The Arcs. If you've never heard this album, check it out. A little bit more sort of like hip-hop or trip-hop influenced. There are some different vocalists on this album as well as Dan's also singing. This album is really cool and really special. Highly recommend if you're not familiar with that. Then we have, as I mentioned earlier, Dan Auerbach's Waiting on a Song solo album. This is from just a few years ago, and this is the album that on the back there's I don't know if you'll be able to see, but there's a grouping of people on the back there, and one of the guys, if you look in the middle here, is, if you'll look right here, number 12, Dwayne Eddy. So he's on this album in the picture on the back. So that's really, really, really cool. When I saw that, I was so excited to listen to those songs on this album, and they did not disappoint. You can absolutely tell when Dwayne Eddy is playing guitar on a song, and it's no different on this album. Then we have what actually might be the Black Keys' best album, in my opinion, their most recent one from a few years ago. This is Let's Rock by the Black Keys. I love this album. I think it's so fantastic. It's so great that when I scratched it, I had to go buy a second copy. So let's hope I don't do that again. And then the last thing I have to show you before we actually get into the album here is this is a really, really cool special project, side project of Pat Carney's that I don't think a lot of people necessarily know about. This is Jesse Wilson's album Phase. This was produced by Pat Carney, and he played all of the guitar, some of the bass, all of the drums on this album. If you are a fan of the Black Keys album Brothers, this album sounds very, very similar to that, sort of very hip-hop influenced in terms of the overall production of the sound, but it has amazing female vocals over the top of it instead of Dan singing. It is one of my absolute favorite albums of all time, and I think it rivals a lot of the Black Keys music. So this is Jesse Wilson, Phase. Go check that out. So now we're here to the actual portion where I'm going to actually talk about the album we're listening to today. So this Delta Kream album, I don't know that much about, and since I don't have the CD with me, I can't read the liner notes, though I did go on Wikipedia and look up a few things about it. So I do have some notes here, just the song titles and stuff, so I can go through as we do it. But I did want to mention, I know this whole album is an album of older sort of blues cover songs from sort of the Delta River area, I believe, down in southern United States. And it's sort of the music that influenced Dan Auerbach and Pat Carney as they were growing up and as they first started as a band. And I believe they have a whole album out, or sort of an EP called Chula Homa, that is a tribute album to Junior Kimbrough. And he was one of the major influences for a lot of the songs on this album as well, on Delta Kream. But I did write down a few notes here. It said on the wiki page that Dan said that this album was recorded over over a span of 10 hours, spread out over just 2 afternoons, and they had almost no planning and no prior rehearsals before the musicians got together to record this album. So I'm assuming that once they got together, they would maybe rehearse a song a couple times, figure out what they wanted to do, and then record it, then move on to the next song, and then do it a couple times and then record it. Maybe record it a couple times, then pick the best take. I don't know if there were any overdubs on this album whatsoever, so it's going to be an interesting album to listen to. Sonically, every song may sound exactly the same. I don't think that will be the case. Dan Auerbach's guitar tones are some of my favorite guitar tones in the industry because he uses guitar tones that if you just plucked Dan's guitar out of some Black Keys songs and listened to them, it would sound awful. It would sound just like it didn't make any sense, like a fly buzzing in your ear or something almost. But in context with the song, it works perfectly, and it gives a total unique flavor to each of the different Black Keys songs from song to song on each individual album. And I don't know if we're going to be getting a lot of that on this album here, since it was recorded live. I'm sure a lot of the Black Keys albums, big portions of it, were recorded live with Dan and Pat playing maybe the songs together. I'm sure that, especially their earlier stuff. But as you saw with my stack of CDs here, I'm not really the biggest fan of the super, super early Black Keys stuff, where everything was sort of recorded in mono, and it just sort of had this more sort of lo-fi garagey sound to it. I really, really, really enjoy the production of their last decade's worth of music a lot more. So we'll see. This album could be hearkening back to their much earlier days. I also wanted to mention that along with Dan and Pat, Dan, of course, playing guitar and singing, and then Pat playing the drums, we also have a few other people playing instruments here. We have, on electric bass, we have a guy named Eric Deaton. On electric guitar, we have a guy named Kenny Brown, who I actually looked up a little bit online. It said that he was actually a very famous guitar player who played second guitar in Junior Kimbrough's band for several of his albums. He's played with many, many, many well-known blues bands. So that's really cool to have him on the album. And I think having an additional guitarist in the band on this album will give them the songs the ability to feel different from song to song, rather than just having Dan and Pat sort of like rocking out the whole time, each song with sort of similar sounding tones. Then on percussion, we have Sam Bacco, I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. And then on organ, we have Ray Jasildo. I don't know how to pronounce that. Jasildo is what it looks like on organ on a few of the tracks. And I want to mention, I'm actually really excited to see a guy who's just listed as percussion. Usually that will mean, and I assume in this case that will mean as well, you've got like tambourine, shakers, maybe hand claps, maybe even some bongos, congos, additional drumming, things like that. Possibly maybe some cymbals, like some swells or things like that could be included as well. That could all be under the moniker or whatever of percussion. So I'm anxious to see that. Just having that one guy in the band will make these songs sound like there's so much more going on than just for, a drummer could make happen at once while they're playing live. So I think having the percussion in there is going to be a great idea. And I'm really excited to listen to this. We'll see. I really, 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 really hope that the drums sound fantastic. It's one of my absolute favorite parts of any Black Keys album. And I hope, and I think, I'm pretty sure that this album is going to sound sonically fantastic. The only way it wouldn't necessarily sound fantastic to me is if they did decide to lean into that more sort of like, let's go back to our roots, garage band, not really knowing what we're doing when we're recording sort of lo-fi style of sound. But I don't think that they're going to do that. I think that they enjoy the aspect of producing and recording that makes something sound fantastic. And they have a way of doing that on one hand feels very modern, almost like hip hop with the way the drums and things sound, but at the same time has a really cool throwback vintage sound to it. You can listen to a Black Keys album and it feels familiar to you, even if it's the first time you've heard it, because they're just fantastic. And the production is one of the aspects that allows that to happen. So, without further ado, if you've skipped to the start of the album, here we go. You missed some good stuff. All right, I'm going to hit play now, and we'll see what happens if there's an ad or what's going on. Ooh, low bass note to start. Ooh, I love this. Everything sounds close mic'd. The studio is quiet. My headphones are rattling. We got some studio chatter. Oh my gosh, that kick drum is enormous. It's what I wanted. Okay, we got a lead guitar sort of going, and it's off to the right a little bit. Oh, okay, left side, we got a much more distorted guitar. The drums are massive. That kick, the snare is so dry. Everything is dry, and I love it. The guitar is not necessarily dry. Oh. So the first track here is Crawling King Snake, and this is one was originally done by Big Joe Williams and John Lee Hooker. I'm anxious to see if there's any vocal overdubs by Dan on the whole album at all. I kind of suspect that there might not be. Oh, yeah. So we have a less distorted guitar off to the right side, and there is some reverb that is coming from the amp, it sounds like, on the guitar track. It is panned to the right. We have a much more distorted and very, very dry-sounding guitar on the left side. I'm not sure which guitar is which guitarist, which guitar track is which guitarist. I'm going to say I think Dan would be on the right side with the less distorted. Oh my gosh. The low frequency and mid frequency specifically handling on this so far is fantastic. We have a guitar solo now happening on the left. So that might be Dan. Again, I don't know which side is which. I'll be interested to see if this is sort of the structuring for the entire album. Every song is guitar on the left, guitar on the right, drums in the middle, Dan playing or singing in the middle as well. His voice has a little bit of slapback echo to it, but not too much. I love this. Breaking this song down and Dan just doing, or Pat just doing riding on the cymbal. Now, the drums sound like the toms were recorded in mono. Very, very compressed, the drums. But that's the Black Keys sound. That's sort of where that almost hip-hop-y sound comes in. Very old-school blues sort of mentality of over-compressing the drums. The cymbals sound washy, not in the fact that they're washy, but the fact that as Pat is playing the rest of the kit, the kicks and the snares, the cymbals are going up and down in volume, almost like with his playing, and that's just the result of compression. Very, very, very specific sidechain compression. So now they're just rocking at this point. I will say, I'm not super familiar with blues music in general as a whole genre. Almost all of the sort of more bluesy things that I like are more modern sort of blues rock bands or things that I suppose would be sort of considered on the fringes of blues. More blues pop stuff, more... like I said, blues rock things. I like rock bands that have, or metal bands even, that have blues influences in them. So they have sort of blues guitar style solos, things like that. But not a huge fan of old school blues, which is what I think this is drawing from the most. It's really cool that I think this is true for blues music as a genre. Having the guitar play along with the vocal melody is not something that happens all the time. But Dan's vocal melody that he's singing here is basically the same thing as what's being played on the guitar, but the guitar is able to emphasize that with all sorts of additional notes sort of around what Dan was singing. That kick is just massive. I have heard no additional percussion, though there are a lot of cymbals sort of happening. Now the guitar solo that's happening on the left now, very Black Keys to me, not super like pinpoint precision. Like there's a little bit of a messiness to it. But again, that is sort of just blues music for you. Now the song doing a really nice retardando here at the end and slowing down to the end. I'm glad they didn't fade the song out. So there we have some sort of additional percussion thing. A lot of slapback echo on that. sound. Don't know what that was exactly. Okay, now I got an ad, so let's edit that out and get to track 2 right now. Okay, here we go, track 2. This is Louise. Ooh, was that a false start? Nope. Or maybe it was and they just kept going. God, I can't get over the kick. It is fantastic sounding. It is all-encompassing, enormous. Everything is just sitting so nicely. The fact that that is a little bit more simple in production-wise, in terms of there's not all sorts of things flying around all the time, not a lot of background vocals, no sort of like keys or anything like that, nothing, no programmed elements, at least that we've heard so far. Means that everything can have its own space in the mix, and it can just exist there. And as long as the vocals sit in the pocket of everything that's happening, you have a nice and well-balanced mix. It would be easy with something like this to have the things too loud on the sides, or the bass, or especially the kick and the snare in the middle, interfering with Dan when he's singing his vocals. But that's not happening because his vocals are in a different range than the drums. There's not a lot of high frequency whatsoever at all in the mix at all that I've heard, in terms of like the high frequencies, like say above 8K maybe or so. I don't hear a lot of that in there. And some of that could have been in mastering, taking out some of the sizzle there to make everything fit a little bit more so into the sort of feel a little bit more round. But I'm guessing that that's just a method of the way they recorded. You know, I don't know if they recorded this to tape or how they did it. You know, Dan and Pat are some of those guys that like to record using old analog methods, lots of old analog machines. But, you know, in this, I'm sure they just had microphones in a room. I don't know how many mics they would have on a guitar cabinet for each of the guitars. We do have, as I said multiple times now, guitar on the left, guitar on the right. And I'm assuming, it's hard to tell from the mix, but I'm assuming what they did was they have each guitar track being sent to an additional track, like an auxiliary bus, and this is getting a little deep into production stuff, but I assume they have the guitar sent to sort of like an aux bus or some sort of a track where they have different sort of like effects on it, like some reverb, some things like that, to just sort of have everything feel like it's happening in the same room, even though it probably, I'm sure it was happening in the same room. It would be interesting to know if the drums were in the same room as the guitars when they were recording. I would probably say no, just because it's tough to do that, have guitar amps really loud in a room sitting next to drums, and to get them to sound so fantastic with how they sound right now. But having the guitars sent to one additional track, a stereo track with some sort of reverb or different effects, maybe some sort of a delay or something like that on it, means that a signal, hold on, I'm actually going to turn it down because it's a little loud. A signal can exist on the left, but when you have its reverb or the effects that are on that signal panned to the middle in a stereo track, anything you send to that track will sound like the origin of it is the middle of the room. So it's a way that you can use to create a stereo space while having things spread wide, even if they're individual or recorded in mono with just one microphone, panning it a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, having them to that additional track that's panned center but stereo means you can have your effects be stereo. You can have everything sound like it's existing in the same space. It's kind of a hard thing to explain, and I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining it, and I could be totally wrong as to how they're doing it, but I think that everything would sound a little bit more separate if they weren't doing that. So, all right, that song was mostly instrumental. So we're on track 3 right now. This is A Poor Boy, A Long Way From Home, originally by R.L. Burnside. The last track, track 2, is Louise, originally by Mississippi Fred McDowell. Okay, so this song has a groove that's very similar to some other Black Keys songs. So that's very interesting. And I'm noticing the bass guitar on this song a lot more, which means the bass part was probably one of the more driving factors for this song. You can have the bass playing its bass riff, and then the guitars can just sort of do what they want to do on the side of that, rather than filling up space all the time playing the core riff or the core groove of the song. The guitars can just exist by themselves, doing something that's also rhythmic but also sort of a lead. And having both guitarists not being afraid to do leads, which is what's happening here so far on all three of these songs. Having the bass and the drums in the middle, being that driving factor, or that driving force, allows the guitars to exist sort of independently, and it can be chaotic. They don't have to play the exact same thing timed perfectly. It can be a little bit washy or unmatched in terms of timing, even though everyone's playing everything in time. I don't want to say that. But because the song's structured this way, and so far all three songs have been a little chaotic feeling in terms of the playing and everything, you can have this sort of chaos existing as long as the core rhythm of the song, in this case being the drums and the bass, just moving along, trucking along at the correct speed, the correct time. You can have a more sort of chaotic imbalance of timing, I guess, on the sides. A lot of guitar soloing on these albums, on these songs on this album, which is interesting because when I think of all the Black Keys albums that I'm aware of, that I enjoy a lot, soloing is not a big part of those albums. Dan does not solo very much. A lot of the songs don't some of the albums, I don't think Brothers even has maybe one guitar solo on it at all. Maybe it does. There's a few songs I'm sure that do. And there are certainly lead guitar parts, but not necessarily like sections that feel like, okay, here's the solo, go. Improvise a solo, write a solo, go. Now, one thing I will say about this specific song we've got right here, the kick drum does not sound the same at all. The kick drum is not huge and massive like it was before. You can still hear it, but it is not all-encompassing. And the reason for that is because the bass is sort of taking center focus in terms of what the low frequency of this song is. The low frequency on this song exists in the bass, and they're using that as the driving factor for the low frequencies. So if you had the kick be that giant, massive, all-encompassing kick that was on the two previous tracks, it would be very, it would clash a lot with the bass. And you can do that, but they chose to bring the kick drum down in the mix and take away some of those monster sub-frequencies and have the bass be the giant resonating low frequency that you're hearing on this song. And that just sort of allows the bass to be a little bit more expressive and not necessarily just sort of this like droning, thickening agent to a song. Okay, we are already done with that song. This album's amazing so far, and it's hard for me to talk about it almost because I'm just talking about what I'm assuming they did production-wise. So we're on track 4 now. This is Stay All Night. Oh, we got an ad. I'll be right back. Okay, I just had 3 ads for the exact same thing. Spotify, you suck with your ads. Very annoying. Okay, we're going to be on to track 4, Stay All Night right now. Okay, starting right away. It sounds like it was left over a bit from the previous track in terms of the sounds that we were hearing, the guitars and everything. And I love that. This is mixed like some guys in the studio playing songs. And I would love it if they did that, just record the entire thing straight through. And that's exactly what we're hearing. I'm going to guess that's not how it worked. You could easily, intertwine the songs a little bit at the intros and outros to make it seem like that's what they did. And I'm assuming that's what they did after the fact. Go through, as I mentioned at the beginning, play a song, get a good take, practice the next song, get a good take. Now, that's not to say that these guys aren't good enough musicians that they could do it all in one go, like a live set. Of course they can. They're the Black Keys, with some really well-respected and amazing backup musicians as well for the session. So of course they could. It would be very difficult to do that, so I'm going to assume that they did each track individually. I want to focus on Dan's singing here for this one because I want to make sure that I don't just talk about the guitars and the mixing and everything, because it is hard to, or I guess maybe there are a lot of different aspects to what they're doing that is difficult that only fantastic musicians could do. But I think so far on this album, I've only heard one track of Dan singing, no overdubs whatsoever. And it can be a tendency for singers to hide sort of some of their imperfections behind lots of tracks, lots of artists, lots of singers have multiple tracks going consistently throughout every song. You have additional takes, overdubs, you have harmony overdubs, you have background vocals, which would be a different person doing and any individual singer can do their own background vocals, but you could have backup singers doing background vocals. You could have other members of the band doing background vocals. You could have shout vocals. When the chorus kicks in, usually on songs, you have a lot of extra elements coming into a song. And for a vocalist like Dan, who's a great singer, though I've seen interviews with him, I've heard him talk. He is a self-conscious person, and their music when they first started was very raw and very just them playing it. But as they've gotten hugely popular, the Black Keys are one of the biggest bands in the world right now. For them to have an album like this with just one track of vocals is really brave of Dan. And I'm not surprised at all because they're such incredible musicians, as I've said. But for them to have a whole album, which I assume it's going to be the whole album with no background vocals or anything like that, actually has been significantly less vocals on this album so far than any other previous Black Keys songs that I've heard other than sort of instrumentals. But I think that's kind of the point of this. But anyway, in terms of the vocals, I just want to say that I think commend Dan for being able to put himself out there, have one track of vocals, and not try to hide it behind other things. I enjoy those elements of a lot of my favorite Black Keys songs have all sorts of things flying around. Female backing singers, Dan doing multiple takes of vocals, things like that. Even having just one overdub doing the same line. The line he's singing right now, that's just him singing it once, the way he would if he was performing it live. And I assume the way that he will do it when they do end up performing this album live. It's very awesome in today's music market to have a band do something so raw and intimate like this. And it's weird almost calling it intimate because it is loud, compressed blues rock music, which doesn't necessarily scream intimacy. But to have Dan just have one vocal in the middle is a really, 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 really cool thing. And I love that. Sometimes you can also fall into a trap when you do things like that of not being able to as easily separate the different sections of a song, or not being able to bring up the energy of a song enough to differentiate from one part of a song to the next. Now, I am noticing with these songs that structuring isn't necessarily super, super, super important. So far, every song has been, let's sing a little bit and then basically just play guitar for quite a while. I haven't heard a lot of here's the chorus. We're going into the chorus now. And maybe it's just because I missed it because I was talking too much, but I love the production of this so much. I need to get my thoughts out while I'm thinking them. And I'm a little bit afraid that as I'm talking now, if every song sounds just like this throughout the album, what am I going to talk about for the next 7 songs? But oh my gosh, is this song ending already? It is ending, or at least it's winding down. It's got 40 seconds to go. Oh no, not 40 seconds. It was on. All right, so we had a little tambourine in that song, by the way, and the kick was a little bit louder, but not to the degree of the first two songs on the album. Okay, this is Going Down South, originally by R.L. Burnside. That previous song, Stay All Night, was originally a Junior Kimbrough song. This song, 3 minutes, 48 seconds to go. This one's got a nice little head bobbing. Whoa. Whoa. That is Dan Auerbach's falsetto voice. Wow. Dan, on the Black Keys album Brothers, Dan used his falsetto voice a lot. He sang in his high upper register quite a bit, and I'm not as big of a fan of that register of his voice. I like the mid-range lower register of his vocals. But what did they do? He started singing in a different register, and what happened? Automatically, this song has just separated itself from the four that came before it. By him doing that, this is an element that he is using his voice in a different, unique way to this song so far on the album, unique to this album, makes this song stand out. Now, one thing I will say about the drums that I'm hearing on this, there's the tambourine that's very dry off to the right a little bit. You hear. I was anxious to see if the tambourine would go away during the verse here. But what I was going to say about the drums is that the kick is back to being loud again. The bass is still sort of the driving force for the low frequencies on this song, but Pat is playing the drums softly on this song. You know, he's riding on, or he's doing a, what's that called? When you hit the side of the snare. Whatever, he's doing the rim shot on the snare. I think maybe that's what it's called, rim shot on the snare, which makes it feel a little bit more laid back. But then his kick, he is playing it softly. And what that means then is you can turn the volume of the kick up, and it's a much more round, less harsh sound, but it's still got that low frequency. You can still hear the sort of sub frequencies that are happening in the kick, even though he's playing softly. He's not bashing the kit now. He's just playing softly. And, right now riding on a ride cymbal. And the snare, I will say, now he's playing on the snare. Sounds like the snare is totally turned off, which is what you would do if you were recording a rim shot on a snare. Sounds like he has the snares turned totally off, which is interesting and not something you hear in many songs. And so it sounds like less like a snare drum and more like almost like a single hit off of like a conga or a bongo or something, like a big one. Or a really, really, really tight tom drum. Okay, now we're back to the rim shots. And he's playing the hi-hat. Now I'm also hearing now a tambourine on the right side, but a shaker on the left. Okay, so they do have some overdubs in here. There are overdubs happening. A little retardando at the end of the song there to kind of end it up. That was nice. I like that song a lot, even though I'm not as big of a fan of Dan's falsetto voice. Oh my goodness, ad. Okay, we're back 4 stupid ads later. This is Coal Black Maddie. 3 minutes, 48 seconds again. This was originally done by Ranny Burnett. I will say I was talking about the drums the last song quite a bit. It does sound like the drums, for the most part, are mixed mono. Like right now, we have someone doing tambourine off a little bit to the left, or in the middle, I'm not quite sure. But Pat is playing some crashes, and those are off to the side. Unless those are additional crashes that were done after the fact by the percussion guy. But when Pat is playing the hi-hat on this song, it is panned dead center with the snare, which they do have the snares back on the snare drum. And the kick is in the middle as well. So you have kick, hi-hat, snare, which are sort of the 3 fundamental aspects to what he's playing in this song. And I'm hearing crashes in the middle as well, but the crashes are kind of spread out as well, which they could have done that after the fact, though that'd be a little tougher to do. So I'm assuming that they recorded the drums in stereo and then they just chose to make certain aspect mono. And not necessarily recording the drums stereo. You can record everything with just one microphone on every instrument and then just place it where you want to. That could be what's happening here. I guess I should say, if you're a guitar player and you're listening to this and you're like, how can you not be commenting on the fantastic guitar playing that's been happening the entire time? Yeah, it sounds great to me. I enjoy this, but it's not really my forte guitar playing at all. I'm a horrible guitar player. So I'm not the best person to sit here and tell you how fantastic it was that Dan just went from that note to that note, which is a really hard thing to do, and he's a technical master because he did that, or you can tell that he did this here and went to this thing, and that note was cool because it fit in the key because of this, because the other guy was playing this note on the guitar, and my music theory is not that fantastic, so I really can't comment on that too much. As I said already several times, it's a little bit tough to talk about this because every song so far has had basically the same exact layout, the same outline, not necessarily structure-wise, but every song is guitar over here, drums here, bass here, vocals here. Let's sing a little bit, and then let's play guitar for basically 3/4 of the song, is how everything has sounded to me. Now, not being a guitar player, that's impressive, but I would much rather have, fuller songs with more parts that were easily understood and parts that you come back to so I can look forward to hearing the chorus or the bridge or the pre-chorus or whatever coming back up. And that's just sort of one of the, I don't want to necessarily call it a downfall or a pitfall, but it's one of the elements to having an album like this that is recorded live and that is what it is, guys performing. There's not a lot of extra things going on. I enjoyed the tambourine in that song. I mean, to me, it sounds like it's just guys playing a song for a while, and then they're like, okay, yeah, we've done it long enough, and so we're on to the next song. So now we're on to Do the Romp, which I believe is a song that they recorded for their very first album. I could be wrong about that, but the big, what's that album called? I don't have it. The Big Catch Up or something like that, I believe. I'm sorry. Okay, we're back to the kick sounding the way it did on the first two tracks. Massive and amazing. Now that I've talked about the production aspects that I enjoy a lot, and because the production is very similar from song to song, again, we have tambourine here. Now here it sounds like they're hitting the tambourine with something almost, maybe not necessarily the hand. And there's a little bit of reverb on the tambourine as well to get it to bloom a little bit. Anyway, now that I've talked about the production, I'm starting to focus more on the structuring of the songs, which is something that I personally do not enjoy. I do enjoy, I love the sound. I love the way this sounds. It sounds fantastic to me. But so far, most of the songs have been, I feel like, and again, it was hard for me to kind of focus on everything while I was talking about the production, which is the thing I like about it the most. The songs have sounded, like I said, sing a little bit, and then let's just play guitar for a bunch. That's not necessarily my kind of thing. God, this just sounds fantastic, though. Oh, my goodness. That kick is amazing, and when everything comes together and that beat just comes around and they all play the same thing for a second. Oh. Ooh, that's so awesome sounding. It's fantastic. But I guess what I was thinking and kind of driving at was, to me, this when I eventually do get the CD, this will be an album I put on when I don't want to focus on what I'm listening to. Because I don't want to focus on someone just playing chaotic guitar solos for 4 minutes, and then another 4 minutes of that, and then another 4 minutes of that. I love the way this sounds. and everything that they're playing is amazing and very technical, I assume. And like this song, I believe so far has a lot more vocals than some of the other ones. But I'm a little disappointed. Like I said, this would be an album that I would put on maybe in the car if I want to drive around and just listen to something that sounds really, really awesome, but not necessarily sing along with it. You know, you can't really sing along with the guitar solo. So I guess I'm showing my like, oh gosh, I just only love pop music that I can sing along with. Well, that's one of the things I like the most about music. Not necessarily sing along with, but being able to look forward to, you know. I have said before in many, many of my reviews that I really, really enjoy songs that are structured with the classic ABA structure. You know, verse 1, chorus, verse 2, chorus, bridge, chorus, outro. I like that. Of course, it's nice if you have a 10-minute long song and there's 5 extra sections that they can place in there and shuffle everything around a bit, but I want to make sure that the song goes back to the chorus to finish it off with the big finale. You know, I want to be able to sort of anticipate where I'm going when I listen to a song. And so far on this album, I haven't really been able to do that. And I know I was mostly focusing on the production and not paying too much attention to what was happening structurally or anything like that, but I've heard a lot more guitar solos on this album than I have heard vocals and anything else. So man, that riff is so cool though. Now the bass, I will say about the bass is almost only low frequencies here. There's not any really high frequency or definition to the bass at all. It is almost only low frequency. And that's all it needs to be for this. You having the guitars existing in that mid to high frequency range. I will also say, if you took the tambourine out of these songs, it would be a huge, 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 huge difference. Just don't sleep on that tambourine. I love that. I love hearing him talk in the studio. Oh my God, another ad? Okay, track 8, Sad Days, Lonely Nights. This track and the track before it and the track that will come after it, Walk With Me, are all originally by Junior Kimbrough. For goodness sake, I finally got one of those ads that's like, watch this ad and you'll get 30 minutes of music. Oh, listen, another blues riff. More straightforward beat this time. I will say it is interesting, the little differences from song to song. For example, like how aggressive or loud the hi-hat is on this song. And I think actually a lot more of it has to do not necessarily so much with how it was mixed, but how Pat was playing it on this particular song. Seems like he's playing a lot less aggressive, you know? And it's right in the middle again. Well. Nope, now I'm hearing it off to the right a little bit. Which is interesting. When you're mixing drums, you have two sort of essential ways you can approach it. You can approach it in terms of panning from the perspective of the producer, someone looking at a drum kit. Okay, I'm looking at the drum kit. It's got the kick in the middle, snare kind of in the middle, hi-hat off to the left of the snare. Or I guess if you're looking at, sorry, I always look at it from the perspective of a drummer. So when I'm mixing drums, I think about, if I was sitting in the drummer's seat, where would everything be? When you're sitting in a drummer's chair, you have the kick right in front of you in the middle, snare mostly right in the middle, hi-hat off to the left a little bit, floor tom off to the right, probably more toms panned where they are from the perspective of the drummer. But a lot of albums have the drums mixed stereo-wise from the perspective of looking at the front of the drums. And that's always an interesting thing to happen. And that's what's happening right now on this song. We have the hi-hat off to the right a little bit instead of being off to the left. And the ride cymbal, usually, if a drummer is playing, their hi-hat is here, and then when they go play a ride cymbal, you can ride on any of your cymbals, but there's usually a specific ride cymbal that's a bigger cymbal, and that's usually over here. And in this case, I'm hearing him ride on different cymbals, but I'm hearing his ride cymbal over here off to the left. So that's very interesting. I guess I've never really paid too much attention to that on previous Black Keys albums, to know which way they tend to do it. Also, another interesting thing to throw into this thought process is whoever mixed, I know that it was produced by Dan and Pat, but whoever recorded and mixed it, credit goes to them as well. I didn't write down who did it, but if they were all performing these songs live, they weren't able to be in the studio and make adjustments or anything like that. Like, I'm not sure if Dan would sit in the studio while Pat is recording drums for previous albums and be able to do different things. Just monitoring and being in the studio is a much different feel, obviously, than Dan having to sit there and worry about his guitar part, not being able to have any input really on the drums other than just being in a band and saying, hey, why don't you do this here or whatever. Giving that control away and just being members of the band and saying, here, you take this, our recording engineer, there are other producers with them, you take this and you do it and just let us play and make this sound fantastic. Now, I will say, this sounds like Dan and Pat's production. It sounds like a Black Keys album, like a modern Black Keys album. And I cannot tell you how happy that makes me. I've said it now multiple times. The production is what I love about this the most, and it is holding true. I do enjoy this song a lot, though, I will say, as I'm listening to it. Dan's vocals, I feel, are a little bit more forward. They're a little bit higher in the mix. And it's really interesting because his voice sounds very dry, but you can tell there's a slapback sort of echo or delay on his voice as well. But the initial sound that I'm hearing is very nice and crisp and right in your in my face in the mix. And then I'm assuming they sent that to sort of an aux bus or another track and had the effects on his vocals there. That's why you hear still the completely crisp, clear sound. And then the effects can have other effects on the effects, if that makes sense. You can EQ, you can compress just an effect and not include Dan's original vocal track, the initial untouched raw vocal track, in that, like, that layering of effects. That's what it sounds like they're doing a lot of. And I'm sure they're doing that on everything else. When I was talking earlier about having one guitar here, sending them to a bus to have the effects on them, that's one of the reasons you would do that. You can have reverb on something and compress the reverb, but not compress the raw audio as well. So that's a very common, very simple way to affect the effects, if that makes sense. I like that song a lot. Nice little drum roll there at the end. Oh, we're going to get some talking here for 10 seconds or something. I love the feeling of them in the studio, just performing. Okay, walk with me. Oh, yes! That is the drum sound that we want. I love it. That kick, the little trills on the snare drum, the little rolls. That is Black Keys to a T. Track 9, Walk With Me, Junior Kimbrough. This song so far been a little bit more repetitive, which I enjoy. It's allowing me to get into the groove a little bit more before having something being like, here, listen to me, I'm soloing. I will say so far this song sounds the most like what could have been a Black Keys song on one of their previous albums. Here's that guitar solo off to the right. Now there's sort of an interesting sounding like cymbal thing going on there, sort of like a ch 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 ch. That sounds kind of like a tambourine, but not necessarily. Almost like a cymbal that's going. That could have been Pat playing that on a cymbal, or it could have been the aux percussion guy. I've been talking about the percussion a lot, so I should say. Oh, and I just mentioned aux percussion. Aux percussion stands for auxiliary percussion. When you're talking about a mix, that's just sort of additional percussion that have been put in a song that is not the drummer playing the drum kit. Sam Bacco. Okay, now it's the left guitar player's time to solo. Now, I will say on that last song, they were talking a little bit at the end, and it kind of sounded to me like when Dan said something, he was off to the right a little bit. It sounded like Dan saying it. Could have been someone else, but it sounded like Dan's voice. So maybe that would lead me to believe that Dan's guitar is on the right side of the mix. Maybe when I sit down and listen to this album multiple times and I try to focus a little bit more on it as a whole rather than the individual elements, maybe I'll be able to learn to appreciate blues guitar stuff a little bit more, because I feel like what's happening in these songs is very special, and I can feel that rhythmically there's this very cool like sway to the songs that I feel a lot when I listen to sort of more bluesy sort of influenced music or blues music in general. Just a groove that I really, really enjoy. And I can tell that what's happening around me is impressive solo-wise and whatnot, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend to tell you that, like, I get this. Like, it sounds much more like improvised guitar solos rather than someone sitting down for, days to write out a guitar solo part, which, coming from the sort of more metal side of things, is generally how that stuff is done. The few metal albums that I have recorded with bands, they put just as much effort into writing the guitar solos as they do into writing the entire song, because it's about that. The guitar solo is just as important in a lot of metal bands, if not significantly more important than the actual vocals. The vocals are just the thing to sort of drive the song along and sort of be a map to like what part of the section you're on till you get to the guitar solo. Bands like Children of Bodom, things like that, where you're just waiting for the solos. Blues music to me seems a lot more like jazz music, which is another area of music, another genre that I'm not super familiar with, where it's not so much about let's do the coolest thing ever, like let's be technical, let's think about it, let's write it out. It feels a lot more just like natural and like in the moment. And it's hard for me to articulate anything, my thoughts about that, other than to just say, yeah, that was cool. Love that you hear the tom there ringing out. Whoa, 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 whoa. Just a bare, raw tom hit. Okay, this is Mellow Peaches, originally by Big Joe Williams. Okay, here in this song, organ. This is the first song I've noticed the organ on it, and I happen to notice that I think the organ player was playing the organ on 4 or 5 of the songs on the album. But this is the first one that I've noticed that, so wow. I either must have been totally ignoring it, talking about something else, which is probably what happened, or the organ wasn't as noticeable. I will say that I could see a lot of people who are really big fans of the Black Keys work from the last 10 years feeling a little isolated from this album, feeling a little bit disappointed, because this to me sounds like an album for blues fans. And You know, like, for example, I can show my mom, like, Gold on the Ceiling, for example. Great catchy song with a totally, like, foreseeable structure the first time you listen to it. Like, you know where the song's going to go. There's no solos. There's no sort of technical thing to intelligently analyze or anything like that. It's just a good pop song, basically, with really, really fantastic production that the Black Keys are known for. But then also that's sort of a little bit of an edge that they have as being like a rock band that knows what they're doing, but also like a bluesy influenced rock band. So there's little things that they can put in all these sort of pop songs, if you will, that make them special and bluesy feeling. Whereas these are just like straight up blues songs, I feel. That organ right there was awesome. I would love it if we got like a key organ solo on this, would be great. But I could see a lot of people feeling disappointed with this album, or being bored while they listen to it because it's just not what they're expecting. And on one hand, I absolutely love that because it's the Black Keys saying, hey, music industry, come here for a second, and slapping them in the face and saying, hey, remember where we came from? Look at what we can do. We're one of the biggest bands on the planet. We can do whatever we want. We're going to make a blues album that's like, I'm just going to go on a limb here and say probably one of the best blues albums that's been released in a while. I mean, again, I am not a blues aficionado. I do not exist in that genre. I don't exist in that world. But this has to be... I've never personally heard blues that was like produced this fantastically before. And it's accessible enough in that they're just doing... It's not free jazz, you know? Even though I feel like there's a lot of improvisation going on and a lot of soloing. And the fact that the instruments that are soloing are panned is a little bit weird, not having something in the middle. A solo panned in the middle is a little bit different and not necessarily very mainstream to have something panned to the side soloing. But, like, this sounds fantastic. So, I mean, this is probably the best blues album I've ever heard. I only have a few other, like, straight-up blues albums. I really enjoy the artist Danielle Nicole. I enjoy her album Wolf Den a lot. That's just a straight-up blues album. But that's a lot more structured normally. There you go. I just talked for a whole song without really talking about the song really at all. I do love the organ in that one a lot. We only have one more song, and then there's a reprise, I believe, of the first track, and we'll listen to that as well. So this is Come and Go With Me, originally by Junior Kimbrough. So when one of the guitars is just playing by themselves, usually at the beginning of a song, you can hear it off to the side, but you can also feel, like if you close your eyes and you imagine the guitar being over here, you can also feel that the sound is spread out around you in the room, as it were, if it were. Ooh, that tambourine. I love it. That tambourine is close mic'd, and you can hear the little rattles that happen in between the hits. That is a risky thing to do because you can't necessarily control those. But it just makes the whole song feel more plodding because there's like, it's like a thing that's happening the whole song here. Again, we're only a minute into it. But that was very cool. And now the tamborine's there, but just... it's not doing that anymore, but now... Now Pat is playing the hi-hat. Whatever, that tambourine was amazing at the beginning of the song there. It felt very loose, very shaky. Anyway, what I was saying was you can feel the room in the guitar, and that's kind of what I was trying to talk about earlier. If they didn't have that auxiliary track with the effects on it in the room, and another way they could be getting that effect, by the way, just to let you know, is if they had a bunch of room microphones in stereo, and then they just have that a little bit, though that would be much harder to get a specific effect that I'm talking about here with the sort of reverb and sort of room sound that's happening on the guitar. If they didn't have that on there, and there was just a guitar playing on one side or the other side, sorry, I hit the microphone, or the other side, it would just sound isolated and raw and by itself over here. You would only hear sound over here, and that would be almost disorienting. You have to have a sound that's put in a specific part of the spectrum, the stereo spectrum. You have to have a basis for understanding of where it's coming from, obviously in your ears. But you also have to have a reference sort of for what's happening, and having the auxiliary track with the sort of effects on it helps you keep everything grounded. Obviously, when you listen to something, you can tell, oh, it's over here, it's over here, it's over here, or it's way over on the far 100% right, 100% left. But I cannot stress enough how important the things that they're doing to these mixes are to make it feel accessible and not like amateuristic. This is all amazing. Ooh, I love the organ here. Interesting little timing thing there. See, here I'm hearing the hi-hat on this song panned in the middle. Ride off to the right a little bit, or some sort of a cymbal. You can really, all of the sounds sound so big. Like, you can imagine if you were the microphone looking at the hi-hat right now, it would be very close. And that's the same could be said for any of the instruments, I believe. Maybe not necessarily the guitars. And I am not good enough with the guitars to sort of even try to guess how they mic'd the guitar cabinets or whatever they ended up doing with the guitars. All I know is that it does sound fantastic. There's almost like a weird little, like, I don't know if there's like a long delay on the guitar on the left, I mean. But it almost sounds like there's something happening in the background a little bit. I hear the organ. The organ's more sort of on the right side, but there's something on the left occasionally as well that I hear. I like this song because it's slower. Give the songs more time to breathe. That's something I do comment a lot in my other reviews. I like it when a band gives a song time to breathe. Like, I wouldn't mind if some of these songs were few of the songs. Some of them have been close to 6 minutes long, which is nice and a bit of a refreshing change for the Black Keys. Sometimes they have some longer songs, like Black Submarine, I believe, is the one off El Camino. Or maybe that one's off Turn Blue. But anyway, they have some songs that are a little bit longer and feel a little bit more sort of progressive-y. But giving the songs time to breathe is nice. Oh, there you can really hear the sort of tone of the amp. You can hear the room. Okay, now we're back to this is the Crawling King Snake edited version. I don't know if there's going to be any difference to this. I'm going to assume that edit version just means that it's shorter. I don't know if I can check the... 58 minutes and 12 seconds is the total length of this album. That's significantly more than I would have thought for a Black Keys album ever. Even a Black Keys album with 12 songs. So that's really good. Anyway, by edit, I assume this means edited down for time. Or maybe they recorded a whole nother version of the song that was shorter, that had less solo-y stuff in it to make it more sort of manageable for radio. And I know that this was the song that they released sort of before the album came out. I did not listen to it. It would be hard to take a song like this and edit it to make it shorter. And I'm not even going to go into why. There'd be all sorts of timing issues and things. It could be done, I'm sure, by someone much more talented than me. But depending on how much they recorded live, it's tough to go from one live take to another live take, of course. But you at least have sort of references for that, you know, going from this verse to another take of the song into the following verse on the next take. That's not as hard. It can be hard, especially if cymbals are ringing through. That can be very, very difficult. So I would almost be led to believe that this is probably just a shorter take of the song that they did, probably on purpose. It's just funny, like, I cannot really imagine hearing this song on the radio at all, because the disc jockey would be playing a straight up blues song on whatever radio station they were playing it on. And that's kind of a sneaky thing. I was saying this earlier about how the Black Keys were like, music industry, hey, slap him in the face, we're going to make a blues album. The other side to that coin is someone like me, maybe, sort of listening to a Black Keys album, a little disappointed that that's basically a straight up blues album. I was anticipating that because I know these songs are all inspired by straight up blues songs. I guess I should say that too. Maybe all these guitar solos and everything they've been doing is like copying and like riffing off of the way the songs were originally done back in the day. I don't know anything about that. I guess I've just been treating it like a Black Keys album. This is supposed to be it is a covers album, basically, all inspired by these other different bands. So maybe some of these guitar riffs and things that they're doing are like, oh yeah, that's such a Junior Kimbrough feeling riff or whatever. But unfortunately, I can't speak to that. But I am still enjoying the album, not having any of those reference points. But what I was saying was I could see like someone could be listening to this album expecting it to be a regular Black Keys, or at least what a regular Black Keys album would be based on their previous 4 to 5 albums worth of material. And you get this and you're like, oh, this is not really what I expected. There's not the additional things added to the songs. It's mostly just blues guitar solos the whole time. I could see how that's disappointing. I mean, it's a little disappointing to me if I'm being honest, but to me, the production of it makes up for it totally 100%. So. Okay, so we are now done listening to the album, and if you've clicked through the video and you want to just to the end of the video here and you want to hear my overall thoughts, it's kind of hard for me to give them on this album. I think of all the albums I've reviewed or reacted to on my channel here, which isn't a ton, I haven't been doing this for very long, and I'm not even really sure what my end goal with this channel is, but this is probably one of the worst albums for me personally to have done this sort of reaction/review to, because this wasn't really an album that was made for me. And I think that's sort of what the central sort of idea here with my overall thoughts on the album comes back to, is that this album is a blues album. And I knew that going into it. I knew it with my little bit of research. I knew just sort of the few things that I read online, the posts that they've been posting on Facebook for a couple of weeks, just some little ads they've had on Facebook, the Black Keys have had on Facebook over the last few weeks promoting the album, that I knew that this album was meant for them to be a way to go back to their roots. It was meant for them to sort of pay tribute, pay homage to the bands that inspired them when they were younger, and even when they started, the Black Keys for the very first time, the music that inspired them. And I know that music isn't really something that I've ever really been exposed to, and certainly not something that I could ever speak with. I have no experience with it, so it's hard for me to speak on it. So this album is at its core, a blues album. I mentioned it multiple times as I was going through the songs there. Like, it felt to me like these songs were Dan would sing for 20 to 30 seconds, and then there'd be like a minute of guitar playing, and then he'd sing for maybe another 20 seconds, and then there'd be a minute of guitar playing, and then they'd sing for maybe 20 seconds, and then another minute of guitar playing, and then it was over. And so it felt to me in my first initial listen through that this album is vastly, like, I would say 60 to 65 to 70% all guitar playing. And so I don't think that that's bad. I just don't think that that's necessarily what I personally would want from the Black Keys. Now, I definitely don't think that the Black Keys should make any sort of an album for me. They should absolutely make the album that they want to make. And I think that this was a good time for them to do something like this to sort of maybe, I don't want to say like a palate cleanser or something, though I could see a way where they might have been thinking about this album like that. As I mentioned with some of the CDs in this stack here, both Dan and Pat have been doing all sorts of production work. They've been doing stretching their wings a little bit, I guess, and going outside their comfort zones to do projects for other people with their record labels and things like that. And then even on the most recent Black Keys albums, they've been trying a few different things. On the last Black Keys album that they released in 2019, Let's Rock, that album has a much more of a sort of a later 70s feel to it than any of their previous work. That album is produced a little bit more tightly. There's a lot more layers, I feel, to it than there have been on some of their previous albums. Whereas like Brothers is still very much a raw album for them, but with a lot of intentional hip hop influence in there. And then the two albums they had in between those two albums, Turn Blue and El Camino, were, their own different in their own ways, I guess I should say. And so this album, even if you look at it just on the surface, it was recorded basically live. There's no overdubs really that I could tell. There might have been a few moments where there were a few things in there, because I did hear shaker and tambourine on one song. And it's possible that if Pat Carney was playing the drums, he could be playing a shaker or tambourine at the same time. And then it is also possible some drummers will have a tambourine on their hi-hat, so you can hit the hi-hat, or they'll have like a whole separate little thing off to the side where you can hit the hi-hat with a stick instead of a cymbal or the hi-hat, and they'll have not a hi-hat, they'll have a tambourine off to the side. So you have like a hi-hat and a tambourine on a whole separate sort of like little stand. So you can incorporate a tambourine certainly into a drum kit, but the tambourine that we were hearing on this album was someone played by hand. Especially, I believe, on the last song there, it was really cool. Like I was saying, that it felt very loose. Like you could hear the little cymbal things on the tambourine. You could hear the little things hitting each other and knocking against each other in between the hits, which was a very cool thing to hear and gave the song a very different and unique sort of feel than the rest of the songs on the album. So with this album, they were approaching it different from the very beginning. Before I knew that they had, one of the other things they had said on Wikipedia was that they had recorded this album back when they were done with their Let's Rock tour. And I'm not sure when they got done with that. Obviously, it would have been before coronavirus happened, but I was just sort of assuming that this album came about as a result of them having to be more isolated during the pandemic and having to sit in their studios or at home and just sort of like not be able to do any shows. I could see the idea where they would be like, you know what, let's just go in the studio for a couple days, have some fun, play some songs together like we used to in the old days, get some incredible guest musicians to come in and play with us, and let's just make basically like a live blues album. And I could see how that would be very appealing to these guys in their career. At this point, they are already legends. They are Hall of Fame quality, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame quality musicians with respect in basically every circle of music that there is. I could see why breaking everything down and doing a very simple album with minimalistic effort, other than the initial recording and the performance that they recorded basically live in the studio, I could see why doing an album like that would be very appealing to them during the pandemic, and also after doing all these different albums, as I mentioned, with sort of like different flavors. So on that hand, the album is slightly disappointing to me only because I know that this album wasn't made for me. But on the other hand, we have the fantastic, phenomenal, wonderful, incredible, amazing production that we have all come to expect from something that Dan or Pat is involved in. Any of their side projects, even some things that I've heard a few albums that just Dan has produced for other bands that you know, not necessarily something that I cared for as much in terms of like the style of what the music they were playing was. Certainly didn't like it as much as the Black Keys, but the production on that stuff was just fantastic. And you can listen to something now sonically and you can tell, I wonder if Dan or Pat worked on this. And they certainly have their own unique characteristics with their production styles and everything between, individually. But you can just listen to something and know that it's Black Keys. And this album, I do not think that you could make this album and have it sound any better than the way it sounded. There was a lot of like intentional over compression done. I specifically mentioned with the drums. There was lots of sidechain compression where if Pat was hitting any sort of a cymbal and there was some sort of like a splashy cymbal happening that was a constant, when you're listening to that, if you're just in a room or you're listening to drums, it just sounds like shh. And that's fine. That's the whole purpose of a cymbal being played in that way. As I mentioned in the video, I come more from sort of like a metal world, the metal world. And in metal, cymbals are incredibly important for making a song feel huge and big. If you just had a metal drummer that liked to play the hi-hat all the time, it would seem significantly less heavy than a metal drummer who plays the whole kit and uses crash cymbals a lot. And so obviously that doesn't necessarily work with this style of music that much, but there are moments when you're hitting a ride or something and you're doing something with the drums that's creating more of a shh type of a sound. On this album and a lot of the Black Keys music, they're using sidechain compression, which is a very common compression technique, where when the rest of the drums are playing, you hear that shh kind of go down a little bit as the drums are playing. So if the kick hits the washiness of the cymbals goes shh, shh, shh. And that happens with the entire kit and other aspects of the music as well. It's very common to have many elements of a song be sidechain compressed so that when the kick and when the bass guitar plays, other elements of the song go down. And the trick is to do it in such a way that it's not noticeable unless you're doing it as a way to sort of create a very specific sound. And that's what this was. It's the sound that I feel like they are the best at capturing, that sort of vintage sound of, that I mentioned at the very beginning of the video. When you listen to the Black Keys, there are reasons that you can hear a Black Keys song for the first time, and there are elements to it that feel familiar to you, even though you've never heard it before. That is on this album in spades. You can listen to the album and it just sounds like the Black Keys right away. The key of the songs, the way Dan's singing, the tones of the guitar. The guitar tones didn't really change that much. And but all of those elements, even the way the kick drum sounds to the way the snare sounds, the way the mics were positioned among the instruments and everything to record, the actual process, the production of the album, it just sounds like the Black Keys. And one of the biggest reasons for that is their production, the way that they record everything. And it cannot be understated how important that is and how flawlessly that was executed on this album. It's probably one of the best sounding albums I've ever heard. And I just listened to it on headphones through a tablet with probably not a very good sound processor in it, through the free version of Spotify, which means I was probably listening to 192 kilobits per second rendered MP3s. So the WAV files for this would sound even better. The vinyl would probably sound even better than that, though don't get me started on vinyl, because I have talked quite a bit about vinyl, and I remember I do have all these cool vinyls that I showed you a little while at the beginning of the video if you skipped all that. So I definitely think there's a place for that, but I don't want to get into quality and all that stuff. However, you can't find a better recorded album than this album. Even with all the sidechain compression and all that stuff, I guess I could see like an old school music purist being like, you shouldn't be able to hear compression. You shouldn't be able to, it's too over compressed. No, I don't think so. I don't think it is too over compressed. I don't think it's over compressed at all. In places it might be, but it was done intentionally so. So I think it's amazing. I think you can tell that they approached each song kind of focus, like trying to figure out the focus of what should be here. I feel like the guitars, for the most part, sounded the same throughout the whole album. One guitar panned right, one guitar panned left. Where the guitarists were panned stayed the same the entire album, I feel. But you could tell that their approach with the bass and the drums and then the percussion changed from song to song based on what was needed for the arrangement that they had come up with. Some of the songs, the kick and the snare just sounded massive and close, and other songs you could tell that Pat played the drums significantly less aggressively, and that just gives this drums a different sound. So they were able to take something like the kick and turn it up in volume and keep it around the same level, but it has a much different sound when you're like slamming the kick as hard as you can than it does when you're hitting it nice and softly. So not only were they doing things mixing post to make everything sound as good as they could, but they just are good musicians playing the instruments the way that they should be played for based on what the arrangement calls for. So all that stuff was executed perfectly. And so I'm a little bit torn because, as I mentioned, I know that this album wasn't necessarily made for me. On the other hand, I think it's probably one of the highest quality sonic recordings I've ever heard. I think this type of production, again, it wouldn't work for every genre of music. But for what this album was, for what they did, I do not believe that this album could have been recorded any more perfectly than it was. So with that in mind, I think that the album is a total 100% success. If you look at it that way, I think that it's great. As I mentioned, I also think that this album could alienate some people who are not blues fans. You know, I wouldn't necessarily put myself in that category. I love a lot of things that are blues influenced, that are on the fringes of blues. I love, like I said, heavy music that incorporates blues. I like rock music that incorporates blues. I like just different genres of music that have sort of like blues influenced like guitar solos and things, but that's in the context of something that's sort of a bigger picture rather than just like blues or blues rock. And I hope if there's any actual like true blues, blues rock, blues fans, Black Keys fans that are listening to this, that I didn't say anything like offensive or wrong about blues. I don't want to seem totally ignorant of it because I do understand a few things about it, but it's just definitely not my genre that I'm most used to, and it's not the genre that I'm most well read up on, I guess you could say. In terms of a Black Keys album, though, it's like I said, I'm a touch conflicted because I've talked before on other albums like quantity over quality, and in this case with this album we get both of that. This is a pretty long album for a Black Keys album, 55 minutes or whatever it was exactly. Like the song, there were multiple songs that were close to exceeding 6 minutes long, and it's not that Black Keys haven't had longer songs in the past, but those songs were all sort of more almost like progressive feeling songs that did have a long solo or had a long intro or felt like maybe almost two songs put together, and then they ended up being one song with like sort of a central theme. Whereas this album didn't feel like that at all. It felt like some of the songs just were given time to breathe. But at the same time, I do feel like all of the songs did just kind of have the same sort of like I mentioned, let's sing a little bit and then we'll play the guitar for significantly longer. Then we'll sing a little bit and then we'll play the guitar for significantly longer. This guy over here will do a guitar thing for a minute, then there'll be a few vocals, and then this guitar over here will do a guitar solo for a minute. And then it kind of felt like all the songs, due to the nature of the way they recorded them with sort of like the jam session, like type of style, they just kind of were playing, and then all of a sudden they were like, okay, well the song's done now, so we'll just kind of wind it down a little bit and then it's just over, and I think that that's worked perfectly for this album. Like, but it's still a little disappointing to me. Like I would have liked maybe a little bit more thought put into everything. But again, I say that understanding that this album is meant to be a specific thing. And even though that specific thing is sort of like a loose idea, they executed all of that perfectly. So any gripes or complaints I would have would purely just be from my personal, opinion side of things. Like, oh, I wish that there were some female backing vocals on the whole album. Like, it would have been great for them to have significantly more chorus sections and to have a few ladies or just backup singers in general in the studio with them, just doing some backup vocals and stuff. Or to have the guys playing bass and guitar and percussion or something, put some mics in the room and let them do like shouty background vocals or something. But these songs didn't necessarily call for that. They didn't have sections in them for that, and obviously the guys didn't feel that the songs needed that stuff, or they probably would have put it in there. So, I will say, like I just mentioned, that I do love the sort of jammy feeling of the whole album, and one of the things that it reminded me of a lot, and this is really, really high praise for people who know this, will get this reference, but it did remind me quite a bit of Will the Circle Be Unbroken by the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, which if you're unfamiliar with that album, please go look it up. But that album was recorded in a similar fashion to this, with the guys from the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band in a studio, and then they just had basically the most famous Americana / folk artists of the time come in and perform on songs with them. And so they would just stand in a circle around microphones to play incredible bluegrass music or country music or Americana folk music. And then they would have like different famous people come in and play like a guitar solo here, or do guest vocals here, or violin solo here, or whatever. And that album is made in such a way that in between every track, you can hear people talking. You hear them kind of practicing a little, talking about this, talking about that. There's whole tracks on that album that are just like, this famous person meets this famous person for the first time. So like, it's sort of like their little conversation that they had for just like a minute or so when they were meeting for the first time in the studio. And this album gave me that feeling, I mean, to a far lesser like epicness or epic degree of epicness, but this album having that feeling of like the sound never really stopping the whole way through. You felt like they were all just standing there getting ready to play the next song. And as I mentioned, it would be almost impossible for this album to have been recorded in this order, like the way you hear it live. Certainly they could have done that, but because everything does sound so perfect, my guess, like I said, is that they came up with the arrangement for the first song, did a couple takes of it, got the good one, and then moved on to the next song, figured out the arrangement for that and everything, and then did each song individually multiple times till they got the take they wanted, and then they moved on, rather than doing the first song, then the second song, then the third song, all the way up till the final song, the 11th song, and then running through the whole set a couple times. I very highly doubt that they did that. I'm thinking they did it the former rather than the latter, the way I mentioned there. So yeah, those are all my many thoughts on this. Like I said, this was probably one of the hardest albums that I've actually reviewed on my channel because, as I mentioned, I really like to focus on the production aspects of things. And to me, the thing that makes a lot of music and a lot of individual songs special are the sprinkles that the producers, that the artists themselves put into the song. And that being the things that are not just drums, bass, guitar, vocals, drums, bass, guitar, and vocals. Like it's all the programming, all the extra things. And this album, the core fundamental idea of this album was that this album didn't have those things. So it was a little bit harder for me to talk because song 1 sounded sonically basically the same as song 2, basically the same as song 3, and so on and so forth through the whole album. And it presented a challenge, but at the same time, I do think that it was fun to sort of like micro focus on, like, let's say the drums, and just focus on the kick drum and see how it changes from song to song. And I think having an album like this does give you the unique opportunity to micro focus on things like that, rather than just focus on the bigger picture of a song as a whole and focus on individual elements from song to song. So it was fun in that regard, but hopefully someone found this a little bit interesting, and I'm hoping a lot of people listen to this album, and maybe this album will get a lot of people into more sort of like straight up hardcore blues, because it's going to be this is probably the most widely mass-produced true blues album, I would think, to come out in quite a while. I mean, this is certainly, certainly don't listen to all music out there, but I listen to a lot of music, and this is by far the biggest band to have ever released like a straight up blues album. So If I'm wrong about that, by the way, and this is not true blues music like I think it is, like let me know in the comments, how I'm wrong. Like maybe suggest a few bands or something that I should listen to. I guess I should just go look up the original recordings of some of these songs from the original artists and the original writers and just see what they sound like. Maybe I should do that, but... Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video on my channel. I had a lot of fun making it. I look forward to anything the Dan or Pat from the Black Keys do in the future. I already know which album I'm going to be doing next to react to on my channel, and I'm going to keep it as a surprise. But it is going to be a very, very, very special video because it's going to be dealing with a band that I actually know personally, and I might be getting into listening to some things that nobody else in the world has really heard yet except a few small select people. So if that sounds like something that would be interested to you, maybe think about subscribing to my channel or at least checking back here maybe in a week or two and see if I have the video posted yet. But if not, that's cool too. Just make sure you go out and listen to as much music as you can. Try to listen to all sorts of different genres. Have a good time doing it. Make sure you sit down and actually listen to the music. Get good headphones, get good speakers somehow, sit in a quiet space, listen to some good music, and really try to enjoy it for what it is. Thank you for watching very much, and I'll see you next video. Okay, so since the whole video is over and everything now, if you guys want to see something cool, look at this. I got something cool behind me here in this cabinet. Okay, I don't know how much you can see, so I'm going to pan the camera down. Okay, see this cabinet over here? Check out what's in it. Yeah! Look at that. Look at, I'll just pull out a random one. What do we got? Ronnie James Dio. And Triumph. Whatever. Just some random records. But the bottom line, look at how cool this cabinet is. Isn't that awesome?